Good morning. Yes, we were dealing yesterday with the confrontation between countries around Israel and Israel itself. We looked at the Palestinians and we looked for a brief moment at the nation of Moab, which was always a problem between them. But at the same time, there was also times when there seemed to be friendship between them. David the king, for instance, had taken his parents down to Moab when Saul was persecuting him, so that Paul could not attack his family. He'd taken them down there. And Ruth, the ancestor of Jesus, she too was a Moabitess. You remember the story about how, in the book of Ruth, about how Elimelech and his wife Naomi, because of a famine, had gone down to live in Moab. And they were accepted there and welcomed there. Their sons married Moabite women while they were there. But Elimelech and his sons die, and finally Naomi returns with Ruth to Bethlehem, where she marries Boaz. And their son, of course, was Jesse, and his son was David the king. So Ruth was, in fact, the ancestor of Jesus. And so they always had this relationship. They often paid tribute to each other, a tribute of lambs. And this is incurred here as well, as they asked for peace between the different tribes that existed in this area. But we don't know where these cities were, and we don't know where these places were. So we just have to accept that Isaiah was prophesying over these different nations, and know for a fact that God's blessing would be upon them at times and against them at times. He would be with them as they tried to help the people of Israel. He would be with them as well as they disciplined the people of Israel. But there would also be times when he would bless them, when they would live in harmony with Israel. So we look at the Philistines, the Palestinians, and we look at the Moabites as well. Then he goes on to talk about Damascus. Now, Damascus was regarded as the capital of the Assyrian kingdom. And he goes on here to say something very strange about Damascus. He says there will come a time when Damascus will no longer be a city. It will be completely and utterly destroyed. Just recently, people were wondering whether we were coming to that particular time. As you know, there was a great problem in Syria, and the forces of ISIS were trying to destroy the government of Syria at that particular time. They weren't just trying to destroy the government of Israel, they were trying to wipe out all Christians and Jews in that area as well. It was a time of terrible conflict. Many people actually died. In fact, we had a message from the bishop of that area to say that the numbers of Christians in the land had been decimated. And because of the attack of ISIS on this particular place, millions had in fact either been killed or had left or were seeking homes in other countries. And people wondered at that time whether this was going to be the time when Damascus would be destroyed. Damascus is always Damascus always boasts is one of the oldest cities in the world. But ISIS has just been dispersed from that area and destroyed in that area. Although don't be assumed that it has gone completely. Because in places like Mozambique, it is resurrecting itself. And in places like that, it is at this very moment of time killing Christians wherever they find them. So this was a time recently when people wondered whether this was the time when this prophecy will be fulfilled. But it wasn't. Damascus is still there. But the prophecy of Isaiah says there will come a time when Damascus itself will be completely destroyed and no longer be a city. Then he goes on to talk about Cush. Well, Cush is in fact Ethiopia. This was a strange people who had a strange relationship with Israel. The Queen of Sheba had visited Solomon when he was king, and while there she became pregnant with Solomon's son. And Solomon had sent her home with a large number of his own people who would help with the bringing up of the child she was going to bear. And this child, of course, became the first great king of Ethiopia and the emperor of Ethiopia. So there was a great amount of harmony between the two peoples. In recent years, the Jewish people, once again now established in Israel, have made an attempt to transport any Jews who wanted to return to Israel from Ethiopia to Israel. And many, many plane loads of people have been brought from that country back into the land of Israel. It's also said at the end of this particular part that the Ethiopians will bring a great presence to the Messiah when he comes and present them to him in Israel. So the relationship between Cush or Ethiopia and Israel has always been very close and one which has been very blessed. Amen.